I don't forget to thank anyone. So good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Beth Gerstein, and I'm the Executive Director of AMOCA. And I'm delighted to welcome you here today for MIND+MATTER 5 Bay Area Sculptors. Please note we're recording this for those that couldn't be here today or live too far away. So if you have any problems, hopefully you won't be on screen. Breathing with a mask on. Before we begin, I hope everyone has had a chance to see the Don Wright's Life is Not a Dress Rehearsal exhibition in Gallery B. Artists of Metlock is down in the lower level.
And if they haven't had time before, they can have time after.
There will be some time after. And finally, we have Amy Santaferraro, 2 on a lot, 3 on a tree, in the Vault Gallery. And Amy is with us here today. Please wave. Come on, do the Queen's wave. And I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you about her installation in the vault after this talk is over. In addition to today's program, there'll be a reception on September 11th from 3 to 5 p.m. A number of the artists that are in the show will be coming down from Northern California. And we're doing a combined reception for Don Wright's, and his kids will be here, as well as some former studio assistants and some friends. So if you want to come back on the 11th, we will be having a sort of, assuming everything holds, we will be having a reception here. Before we start the tour, I want to thank some folks that helped make this happen. I'd like to thank the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, as well as the Boardman Family Foundation for their support of this exhibition. I'd also like to thank Igal and Diane Silber, Alan Mandel, and Rachel Mayari for lending works for this exhibition, as well as Julianne and David Armstrong, our founders, and Gail and Robert Brown for donating some of the works that are in our permanent collection that we were able to use for this exhibition. I'd also like to thank Nathan Stanfield, AMOCA's studio manager, Paul Roach, AMOCA's Director of Advancement Communication and everything else, Pam Aliaga, who's our new exhibition manager, and David Armstrong's remarkable preparatory team, Israel and Oscar, for their work putting this exhibition together. I'd like to especially thank Kayla Medina. Wave, Kayla. She is our amazing 2021 Getty Morrow intern, whose last day is today. She was my partner in crime for the last 10 weeks and will most certainly be missed. And we were just thanking Lois Boardman and the Boardman Family Foundation, and Lois is here to join us today, and it's also her birthday. Perfect timing, Lois. I also want to thank our members and donors who support our programs year-round. And today we have Susie Sasaki, who's on the board. And I'm going around the room. We have Kirsten Wilders, who's here as our visiting artist for the next 10 months. And who am I missing? Am I missing anyone? And Joan Takayama Ogawa, who's here, who is one of Kayla's ceramic teachers at Otis College of Art and Design. So I hope I didn't miss anybody, and please forgive me if I've missed out on someone. So now on to the exhibition. I've had the pleasure of working on a number of exhibitions with my co-curator, Jo Lauria. Jo is a cultural treasure to the Southern California region. She's a former curator of decorative arts at LACMA, where she organized the seminal exhibition on ceramics, Color and Fire, Defining Moments in Studio Ceramics from 1950 to 2000. Jo has worked on a number of curatorial projects at AMOCA for more than a decade, including Common Ground, Ceramics in Southern California from 1945 to 1975. That was back in 2011. She worked on Honoring the Past, Embracing the Future, AMOCA's 10th anniversary exhibition in 2015, Discovering SAR Ceramics in 2018, and Silver Splendor, The Art of Anna Silver in 2019. We really don't like working together. Jo and I have a number of collaborative and solo exhibitions in the works over the next couple of years, so stay tuned. If you're not already on our e-list, I encourage you to sign up so that you know what we're up to. So now on to this exhibition. Since the 1950s, the Bay Area has been a hotbed for ceramic experimentation and innovation, Abstract expressionism, Bay Area figurative, and funk movements fueled an art scene in Northern California, making it a leading center of progressive art and thought in the mid-20th century. The colleges and universities in Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, and Davis had students flocking to study with some of the greats: Robert Arneson, Karen Bresci, Viola Fry, Jim Melchert, Ron Nagel, and Peter Volkes. They provided a place to have alternative ways to think about ceramics. They had a significant influence on the next generation of artists, which many of them are in the room today. So,
Take it away.
So take it away. So we're going to start with Richard Shaw's work.
Right.
And
well,
Joe?
I just wanted to say thank you for that introduction. And one thing that I did want to stress is that the shift that happened in American ceramics post-World War II, the 1950s, primarily happened on the West Coast. And California was an epicenter, both Southern and Northern California. And it happened in the universities and colleges, which was something that happened with all the craft revivals in the 1950s through the 1980s. And the Robert Arneson and Peter Volkes were the key members of what is now referred to as a revolution in clay. And as revolutionaries, they purported and brought forth the philosophies to their students to leave behind the constraints of the functional object and instead embrace content and form. And this inspired their students and other artists to look to the abstract and the figural in ceramics, to try radical construction methods, and to really think about the influences of the art movements in which they were living, which would have been San Francisco Bay Area figurative, pop art, and the minimalism had just been passing and was taken over by abstract expressionism and also funk art. And you may say, what is that? And I will give you more of a definition when we go to the artist in the show that is emblematic of the kind of process that funk art goes through. So, but since we're standing here, we can start with someone who has been called a funk artist, but in interviews, he says, Richard Shaw, the artist, says, I don't know if I'm a funk artist. Critics tend to put you into categories, and I'm not sure I even know what that means. He says, I think I just continue to bumble along. But what he does own up to as being a master of trompe-l'oeil, which is a French word that means fool the eye. And the way in which he does that is he tricks you into thinking that all of the components on his pieces are actually the found object that he has assembled. He loves to do assemblages, but his assembly is actually everything made out of clay. So I know you can't touch it, you can't pick it up, nor can I, but if you look really closely, you can see the precision of his work, which is absolutely incredible. And how does he do this? Well, he learned how to do molds early in his career. So he makes molds from actual pieces that he carves in wood. So in order to get those paint tubes to look exactly like real paint tubes, is he would carve a model of a paint tube in wood with all of its rumpled and squished demeanors. And then he would make a mold of that wood because he has to adjust for about 20% of shrinkage because porcelain clay will shrink 20%. So he can't just make a mold of the real thing because then the decals which he makes, custom makes, all of his decals would not fit the tube. It would be less, the decals would be too small. So everything that you see here is a labor-intensive process. And I think that Richard really enjoys that process because he continues to do it. And this is his 40th year of making trompe l'oeil. So the reason I asked him, which you can, you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to the video if you have time at the end of the show, or Paul is going to set up a QR code or some way to access the full video interviews. Each artist was interviewed for about an hour. And the reason that he works with tableaus is, he says, because he likes the ridiculousness of putting everything in one little table that describes or reveals who that person was who left all of those things behind. And he has a great love for European trompe l'oeil, and that's what he's looking to for influences. But also, I think that most of Richard Shaw's work is autobiographical, because if you look at them, they have names like Rembrandt's figure, and they have the accoutrement of what you would use as an artist. So to me, he's actually describing himself, leaving all of these things behind as he's working on the pieces. And he loves to work with architectural space, having this empty frame come out into this space, really makes your eye travel around the piece. And his stick figures are similar. Although with the stick figures, he's really working with the idea of a human form, but he's doing it with such jauntiness. I mean, his figures have cups and saucers for their joints. They have, their digits are brushes and pencils. So he's having a lot of fun with us. And I think that, we smile when we look closely at his work, but then we also realize the emotional content of it, that we are all anatomically put together with different bits and pieces, and how we function, depends on how well the artist has made us. So I have also put some little text panels around that you can read more eloquently what I've written than what I've said. But we'll move on to Nancy Selvin, because Nancy is one of the 2 women artists in the show, and the only one who studied with one of the key figures of this paradigm shift in ceramics, and that would be Peter Voulkos. She was a graduate student of Voulkos's at the University of California, Berkeley, and she has always worked with the idea of the vessel, as Voulkos did his entire career. So she exploits the inside and outside of a container, and here in this series, it is a series that uses the largest scale Nancy's ever worked with.
And she's a petite little thing.
Yes, and she's very, very short and petite, and it's amazing that she builds them from the bottom up, of course, and what she wanted to emphasize is she's manipulating the idea that vessels deal with this figurative language. I mean, anatomically, we are all head, shoulders, body, and feet. And a vessel has a foot, a body. If it has handles, it has arms, and it has a neck. So it's very hard to not project those qualities of humanness onto a vessel, especially one that is of this scale. And Nancy takes us to a whole nother layer of deepness by making these vessels part of a series called the trophy vases. And each vessel, if you look closely, has a name. This one is Sonia, Joan. I think this one's Pearl.
Grace.
Oh,
Grace.
Honoring Grace. Sorry, Grace. Lee Krasner, Charlotte, and Jay DeFeo. And these are all women abstract expressionist painters that Nancy is making an homage to. And the reason for that is she felt that the women who were in this abstract expressionist painting movement were not as well recognized or given the same sort of celebration as the men were. So she is thanking them for opening the door to all the succeeding generations of women who would come behind them, as Nancy did, And she sees these as Heisman trophies. As she said, each trophy says, "You are magnificent. You did this incredible job. It's my way to thank these women for clearing a path and providing an example for all of us." So these are 7 of a larger series, and Helen Frankenthaler vase actually was acquired by the Crocker Museum. And she says, and that vase was the only time that she really used the palette from the painter of Helen, as in Helen Frankenthaler. But she says these are not to be understood as being direct references to their work. They are more Nancy's expressions of what she feels about the painters. And I think that it's quite, literally, that they're grounded by their ceramic bases. And even when she didn't hand make one, she uses bricks. And bricks have a long association with ceramics and with foundations. So this is one series of work that we have of Nancy's. There's 2 other large vases out in the lobby that do not belong to the trophy series, but are of the same scale and palette. But we also have a really beautiful installation, which we will pass on our journey. So she has 2 or 3 different bodies of work. So we can continue.
We'll get
go
to
this
everybody
way,
eventually.
right?
Yes.
Right. We'll just go with what is the clear path.
You want to do Bob next?
Yes. So 3 of the artists, sculptors.
Maybe wait till everybody
Okay,
comes
sorry.
over.
Three of the artist sculptors in this exhibition actually went to graduate school under Robert Arneson. And Arneson was an enormous influence on all of his students. Robert Brady started out actually in graduate school doing very large geometric formations that looked a lot like Solowit, he says, but they were about construction and about the extension of positive and negative space. But he felt at some point that he wanted to go back to figure drawing, which he had done a lot of as an undergraduate at the California College of Arts and Crafts. So he started to make these figural pieces out of clay. And these are fairly early. I think they're 2005. Nope, they're 1994, even earlier than I thought. And his figures are always emotive. They are never realistic, but they elicit a response from the viewer because of their stance and also their minimalism in a way that makes you want to fill in the rest of the figure. He also is exaggerating. He did this series for years, and he continues to repeat it, and he says he always exaggerates the proportions and varies them. Either the legs are extended and too long, or the head is too small, or the torso is shortened. So in this particular group, we can see that he's really made the focal point of the bended legs. He also is doing this work, which is a grouping of mosaics. And he had done mosaics very early in his career and returned to it a couple of years ago because he felt that mosaics had been more or less ghettoized or marginalized by being considered a craft, a home craft. So, but when studying the history of mosaics, you find that they are used a lot in Byzantine culture and also the Roman. The Romans used them so beautifully as floor iconographies. So he thought that he would try to elevate the status of the mosaic by using them in a more serious way. And they too are somewhat figurative. This has a title of Monica, and the other 2 feel either like house forms or a mountain form and another figure. So he really thought this process through. He actually made all of the tiles and broke them and then reassembled them. So it's not as if he was using ready-made commercial tiles. The other part of the exhibition that Beth and I discussed wanting to do is, it is the American Museum of Ceramic Art. But most artists engage other materials, and they also have a great relationship with drawing. And as I said, Robert Brady drew, during his undergraduate years. You can see 2 of his sketchbooks. This sketch really refers very much to the angel figure he has on view at the front of the gallery. Nancy Selvin has drawings of her amphoras. On this side, we have Richard Shaw, who's always inputting some sense of humor in his drawings, and Beverly Mayeri, who's using clay boards to draw on. Which I'd never even heard of, was glad to know that they make them. There are boards that they put clay on, and then you can use them to, like sgraffito. And these 2 pieces up here are envelopes that are trompe-l'oeil. This is a letter to Jean Montgomery, and this is one to Denver. And Richard Shaw has made these.
Richard and Martha.
Well, yes, Richard and Martha made these as a collaboration by doing the porcelain envelopes in this elegantly thin porcelain clay, and then putting overglaze enamels to make them look like letters. And if you look at both sides, they are illustrated. And Richard Shaw is a great illustrator. His father was actually an illustrator for Disney Studios. And Richard Shaw says that his magic as a student was that he could draw, because as he got older, he discovered, or his parents discovered, that he was dyslexic. So he could really understand visually what language, that was his language. So he tells a very funny story in the video about when he was in, I guess what they call middle school now, he kept being sent to remedial reading, because when you're dyslexic, you have a difficult time reading. And every time he got sent to this class, they had him read The Sinking of the Titanic. And then there are images which he uses a lot in his work of a boat which is sinking. And we have one of them on the other side, you can see. But I thought that really made a great impression on him, having to have read it so many times in remedial English. I think I would have started making boats too. So on the same wall, sharing on this side, is Arthur Gonzalez. And Arthur Gonzalez is also a graduate student, was also a graduate student of of Robert Arneson. And he is actually the youngest artist in the show. He's almost a generation younger than the others. He teaches at California College of the Arts, and he really looks at clay in a much more free-willing way. His sculptures refer to funk art, and I asked him, how did that affect him when this art movement of funk came? It came from a 1967 exhibition that Peter Seltz, the then director of the University Art Museum in Berkeley, organized, and he named it funk, giving this name to a style of ceramics that had been percolating in Northern California in the early 1960s. The word funk derives from funky, a musical term referring to a free-spirited blues sound. As Seltz described it in the exhibition catalog, quote, "Funk art is hot rather than cool. It is committed rather than disengaged. It is bizarre rather than formal. It is sensuous, and frequently it is quite ugly and ungainly," end of quote. So Arthur is let's just say, a child of the funk movement. He's taking the best parts of it, which are the emphasis on using clay in its more raw state. Funk gave him the permission to use unconventional materials and techniques and to leave behind that really purity of clay philosophy that had been circulating from the 1950s onward, where it had to be clay that was finished and glazed, and it had to be a functional form. So he is totally breaking down those barriers. And people ask him, why do you include found objects? And his response is, why not? He says, I think that the found objects have great power, and that's why he incorporates them into his sculptures. The symbols that Arthur Gonzalez uses are personal symbology. And you can, if you know his work, decode what those symbols are by looking at many of his pieces. For instance, he does a lot of pieces called the open book series. And an open book is, of course, about the idea of knowledge. And it generally is being held by a young woman, because the woman, a youthful woman, is, in his idea, the keeper of knowledge and innocence. And this is a white fire, which he uses to show passion. So there are certain things in his work that you can kind of look at and try to put the story together. And what he likes about that is that a lot of it is a mystery, but the more codes you know, the more complete the narrative becomes. But he says, even if a viewer, because I asked him, well, what if the viewer doesn't know what your codes mean? He said, well, if I've done my job right as an artist and a sculptor, that I have made the piece interesting enough to stimulate the eye. And that compositionally is what's important to him, as well as these personal symbols. So I think that Arthur really takes from the different movements which he was given by living in the Bay Area, the figurative movement, the funk movement, and really melds them together in a really interesting and exciting way.
Before you move on, one of the other things that he talks about is that even though the pieces are mixed media, that the figures are always made out of clay, because he likes that sort of skin quality that only clay can give him.
Right, and they are, if you look at all of them, the found object parts. And the other reason he says he uses found objects is he says he really respects the work like of Richard Shaw, who can make wood look like wood, but he says he's not interested in that. If he wants a piece of wood, he's going to use a real piece of wood, which he does on the sculpture over here called Acid Rain.
And this whole section in the middle is wood as well.
Right, and this is a piece of coral that's not made to look like coral, it is coral. And again, he says that it's potent because it is representing what the material is in nature. We have 2 pieces of Beverly Mayeris here, and another one by Arthur Gonzalez. And over here we have Arthur's sketchbook. And this is just one of like 50 sketchbooks. And they're all about 5 inches thick. And he uses them every day. He says they are like memories. If he has an idea, he reaches for his sketchbook. And he says he's now learned how to make illustrations on his phone or his iPad, so he doesn't lose any of those thoughts. And he might use them, like for instance, this drawing is very similar to the actual illustration. He has a pastel drawing in the lobby, and this here of the Pinocchio figure, it's we all know the story that Disney kind of adulterated of the Pinocchio with the long nose. For him, that's not a symbol of lying, as anybody who's seen Pinocchio would think. It's really a symbol of the struggle of personal relationships. Because the story that by the Italian writer really talks about the relationship between a man and a woman. And this is a piece that Arthur worked on for more than 20 years. It first was one head, and he kept it in his studio because he said he didn't want to let out any, hello. He didn't want to let out any pieces that he didn't feel were resolved. So 10 years later, he added this other figure of a head on the reverse side because, again, he was trying to think of sculpture three-dimensionally and how to, stimulate the eye to move around the sculpture. And I think you can see that very well in this piece, too, which is all about his fifth realm. And on the video, I asked him, well, what is the fifth realm and why should we care? And he laughed and he said that that term actually comes from teaching. He's been teaching a class at CCA, California College for the Arts, for like 30 years, where he teaches the students what are the different realms. And the fifth realm is iconography. And you can hear him in the video, because if I try to remember the other fourth realms, I'm not going to. But they have to do with other parts of what you do as a sculptor, the use of space, composition. But he says the fifth realm of iconography is the most important because it's what we do as humans to empower objects. So he said the religion loves the fifth realm because of the way that they use icons.
And like the piece here that took 20 years to make, when he was getting ready to send work for this exhibition, these two pieces, which were separate pieces, were sitting on the table together, and he said it was like a light bulb went off that they needed to physically be together almost as one piece. So things happen in the studio that sort of help him rethink a piece even years later.
And I love the way that he's made this hat, which is like a snail, and he's drawn it out in his sketchbook too. So you can look to see how an idea progenerates, and then how it is executed later in one of his sculptures. So we'll, not to leave you behind on this side, we have some of Robert Brady's language series pieces here, and because the space is constricted, we will talk about them on the other side. And then there's another grouping of Nancy Selvin's, which is called, it is titled Intentionally Left Blank. Oh, sorry. Yes, I will be one of the figurative vessels. Intentionally left blank because there are no words left to say. And this is Nancy Selvin's response to the previous administration when President Trump was in office, and language became so abominable that she felt we should just forgo words altogether. And that is why she has left her vessels blank. Generally, as you can tell from her other work, she is a great colorist. But there is one color here, which is the gold. And the gold is a reference to kintsugi, a Japanese term which means to mend. So in the Japanese tradition, they use lacquer that with a platinum or gold or silver metal, and then they repair the cracks or the abrasions in a ceramic vessel. And the gold repairs or the silver or platinum repairs all enhance or embellish the piece, and it is considered to be more valuable afterwards. So I think what Nancy is saying is I wanted to put forward the idea that repair can come with maybe the following administration, and that what we have learned from this is an embellishment. And she's made many of these. We just were able to borrow this particular grouping. So the one artist I haven't really talked about is on mostly, the larger work is on this side, and of both of them, Beverly Mayeri and Robert Brady, which luckily they're both on the same wall. That's my granddaughter. This is her first museum walkthrough.
Oh, nice.
So good for you, Bella. We have to make new patrons.
The next generation.
The next generation. So these pieces are from Robert Brady's language series, and as I pointed out on the wall facing the Gary Avenue are two others, which are larger, but these looked graded together as a grouping. And the language series was something that Robert Brady said he has been working on for years. And it stems from the idea that he likes to punctuate his work between working on figurative pieces and working on abstractions. And the language series is based on his study of kanji, which is a Japanese, one of Japanese 3 alphabets. And kanji is what is called a logographic alphabet, which means that it's made out of characters, and if you originally, in historical kanji, if you saw a character that, for instance, was describing home, you would be able to somewhat identify that as an image of a home, a house. But as kanji developed through the centuries or the dynasties, it got revised. Nobody knows why, probably at the whim of the emperors, so that it became more and more abstract, so that a non-Japanese person now looking at the word, the logographic for home, would not be able to associate it with home. So he's talking about the same thing, which is using language to a continually and repeatedly abstracted form where only a certain amount of people will understand what it means, and the rest of us will be left, to decode it. It will become a mystery, but he feels that mystery is what the magic is that we have to imagine what his symbols are implying. And he says also it allowed him a canvas, so to speak, of being able to vary in size and vary the way in which he constructs them. Some are extruded tubes. The one out in the foyer, or the area with the windows, is actually extruded cubes, squares, and he can endlessly vary his firing techniques and his surface treatment so that he can get, like a word that has 10 definitions. He can get the same sort of variation with his pieces. So, and then that is his angel form right behind us, which he has carved out of wood. And when you listen to him talk, one of the questions I asked him is, why clay sometimes? Why wood? And he said, well, Joe, clay is a very demanding material, and sometimes you just have to leave it and work on something which is less fickled. So he moves freely from working on wood and working on clay, and I think he really shows his prowess in both materials, because he's also does these beautiful drawings and prints that are figurative in nature, because they generally look like they are heads of people. And some of them look like heads of aliens, and they're called Area 51. So, and then we will finish out by just talking about Beverly Mayeri, who is one of the artists in the Bay Area who did not study with either Peter Voulkos or Robert Arneson. She studied with Karen Bresci at San Francisco State. And the reason why she did that is because she saw Karen Bresci's work at an exhibition and realized that Bresci was putting content into her work, that a work now could be meaningful beyond the formal attributes of, sculpturally or compositionally. So Beverly has made a long career of exploring the face, the head, and she generally does it by elongating the face. She's a great fan of Modigliani, the Italian artist, who lived in France, who made these elongated heads and necks of women in his paintings and his sculptures. And she is doing the same thing because she wants people to really concentrate on the eyes and also, just to travel around to get a sense of, as she says, the landscape of a person. This piece refers to all the 44 species that are going extinct or on the endangered list. This face refers to someone who is behind a tundra, behind a mask, and won't reveal what he is seeing or feeling. And this one, she said, she just had a lot of fun. It's called Crowded Faces, by using the surface to see how many faces she could get on the surface of the face, the hills and the valleys. And sometimes she says she puts in her family members, so we'll have to look for that, but we don't have any of that sculpture here. So I encourage you to take a closer look at some of the work and maybe, think about how sculpture has really changed from what it was 30 years ago when everything was realistic. These artists all broke down those barriers and have, they are the result of an intensely experimental time in, during the 1950s to the 1980s. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, and thank you all for coming. If you're not already members, I encourage you to sign up either online or at the front desk. There's also an event over at the Pomona Packing House for Grayson Fair, who's our outgoing artist in resident, and there's cards at the front desk. It's literally like a 2.5-minute drive from here. You can waze your way there. And we'll be around to answer any questions, and thanks again for coming.
Thank you.